The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are our own, or those of our guests, and in no way represent the views of the companies, associations, or organizations that any of us may work for or represent. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they were told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident. You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast that explores the many pathways to an aviation profession, the challenges that a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Aviator Tony, a professional airline pilot currently flying for a U.S. legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 80 of the Squawk Ident podcast, recorded on the 21st of May, 2021. From the mobile Aviator Sound Studios high atop the 6th floor of the Maui Coast Hotel in Kihei on the Island of Maui in the state of Hawaii. Living in the Hawaii state of mind. Now that our pre-flight is complete, let's get ready to push off the gate and start those virtual podcast engines. Flight 80 of the Squawk Ident podcast is officially underway. Today's guest is an award-winning Horseback Archer, an IHAA champion, and currently ranked number 1 in the U.S.A. He is just coming off of 2 competition wins over the last few weeks. He is a humble aviator and an Airbus Captain with a long history at one of the most merged, blended, and evolved legacy carriers in the U.S. market. An airline we here on the show like to call Legacy Airlines, an alias to our employer, a U.S. mainline carrier. And just yesterday, he scored a 27 on a scale of 1 to 10 of Aviator Tony's landing excellence scores. This score takes into consideration weather conditions, runway conditions, and demonstrated skill set. That landing was hot. He has type ratings in the A320 family, the Boeing 737, ATR 42 and 72, and the Jetstream 4100. He has graciously agreed to join us today while on this fantastic layover on the beautiful island of Maui with us. Captain Greg Ogburn, how you doing?
Doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for, just agreeing to be on the show here and allowing me to interview you. We've flown together now probably about three or four times at least, maybe more.
Yeah, over the past few years.
Yeah.
Just never quite could connect, either layover times, red eyes, or whatever. So it's the first time we've been able to sit down and talk about stuff. So
yeah,
pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I saw your name. Thank you so much. I saw your name on the schedule, and I thought, oh, great. I wonder how everything's going. I know you had last time we flew together. It wasn't that long ago, but you were in the middle of a pretty big move from Arizona up to Northern California. You had to contend with the horses and getting them settled, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah, logistically, to move 7 horses and half of our household. We didn't take the whole thing. We're still got our Scottsdale home as a rental right now, so we didn't have to bring all of our possessions. But just logistically speaking, moving horses are like moving 7 kids. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's kind of it was a challenge, but we got everything all settled, and just in time for COVID to hit and cancel our whole season last year. But we're picking things up this year and off to a good start.
Yeah, and congratulations on your 2 recent wins there.
Thank you. It's good, like I said, good to be out on the road again and get the horses out and compete and see old friends and make new ones, and it's a good hobby.
Yeah, the first time we met, you were telling me a little bit about your background and how you were, doing this horseback archery. And at the time, my daughter was, I think, about 13 or 12, and she was getting into archery, and I had purchased a recurve bow for her. And so I was very interested to hear more about your sport and the equipment that you were using. And you had some fantastic photos that you shared with me. So I was very impressed early on, and even on some of your social media page about the sport. There you are, right there in competition. Just how fast are you going when you're shooting off those?
Well, it's full speed. When we're riding down the course, it's a full gallop, and one thing about the sport, it can be enjoyed by all levels at all speeds. However, if you want to be extremely competitive, both nationally and internationally, you've got to be able to ride and shoot at a pretty good speed. So my horse and I have developed a relationship, and so we scoot down the course pretty fast, pretty much right at the maximum speed bonus allowance. We maximize our time bonuses. There's two ways to score in the sport. It's based on time, and then your accuracy, what you shoot on the target. So it's kind of the faster you go, the more speed bonus points you get. But then if you start going too fast, then it's like an inverse relationship. Your accuracy starts to go down. So there's a kind of a happy medium there where you kind of find your comfort zone. And so over the years, we've been able to maximize our scores with speed and accuracy. And so that's allowed us to date, we have 6 American course records. And previously I had one world record, but it just got beat by a junior competitor in South Africa just a few days ago. So easy come, easy go. But nonetheless, my horse and I are generally scoring pretty well, both nationally and internationally. So it's good fun.
Now, for the listeners that are sitting here going, well, I'm dialed into this Squawk Eye Dance and Aviation podcast, what are they talking about? What is the International Horseback Archery Association? What's it all about?
Well, the sport is relatively new here in the United States. So I think the first organized competition was just as recently as 2010. So internationally, the sport's been around for quite a while. Asia, Europe, places like that. It's been going on for a while. So us Americans are kind of newcomers to the sport. So over the years, there's been a movement to standardize, if you will, some of the courses and the rules, because different cultures and different areas of the world have priorities on what they like to shoot, different courses and styles and whatnot. So we, as the International Horseback Archery Alliance, was formed in 2013, and it was formed just to standardize, like I said, the rule set, courses. So if you go anywhere in the world and you shoot a particular course, it's going to be the same dimensions, the same lengths, same target distances from the track, those types of things. And that allows us to not only compete around the world, but also virtually. We do every 2 months, we hold a international postal match. So wherever you are in the world, whatever the course is designated, you shoot that course, and then we turn in our results to the International Federation. And that's just a fun way to compete against others around the world without having to travel. So the only way to do that is to have standardization of the rules and everybody following the rules. And so again, that organization was formed in 2013. Here in the United States, our governing body is the Mounted Archery Association of Americas. So we're the designated Mounted Archery Association for the International Federation, which I am the U.S.A. representative. So I represent all the archers here in the United States on the international body. So I'm on the board of directors for the international body as well as our national organization. I'm the vice president of the national organization. So you could say I'm pretty involved in the sport. But yeah, that's what it stands for.
Yeah, and you're showing me videos of what you did, because I think like most people, they're like, well, you're riding a horse and you're shooting a bow and arrow, or you're shooting an arrow from a bow, and that must be hard because it's a moving target. But when you showed me what was involved, how fast you guys are traveling, I'm like, I couldn't hit the broadside of a building, let alone a target. How many targets do you usually have in one pass?
Well, in one pass, the most we'll have is 5 targets. We have 3 distinct styles that you'll see in any given competition. We have what was referred to as a Hungarian style. It's a tower that sits in the middle of the 90-meter track. And it's got 3 sides to it, three targets, and the objective on that one is to run down the course and shoot as many arrows into the tower as possible in one pass. So you'll shoot forward at it, you'll shoot sideways, and then you turn around backwards and you shoot backwards at it.
So you're riding the horse,
Yeah.
and your back is to the head of the horse, and you're shooting, and you don't fall off.
No. Yeah, well, that's where the horsemanship comes in. So, luckily for me, my background growing up was riding horses. I've been on a horse since I was 5 years old. So, growing up with my father and my brother, we did a number of different activities on horseback, team roping. We played some polo, just general gymkhana type stuff. And then, of course, when I went to college and got into aviation, the horse thing kind of got put on the back burner, and as I pursued an aviation career, so I was away from it for about 12, 13 years until I met my wife, and she had a similar background growing up with horses, and so she informed me that we would be getting into horses someday.
She informed you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. It was definitely. Which at that point I could take it or leave it, but obviously, when the wife says you're going to do something, I guess you get into it. So, yeah. So as an adult, this has kind of been a full circle hobby. So just over the last, let's say I think we got our first horse back in 2003. So we've just been kind of getting back into it that whole time, but we didn't get into horseback archery until 2013. So it took a while to find this sport, but once we found it, then it was definitely a match.
Yeah, and it's great because most aviators out there truly do have a passion for this career field, this profession. And it's that passion that really allows them to succeed, because if you don't have it, it's just a job, and you get bitter and you start to complain, and then all you talk about is work, 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 work. And so to have another passion, another interest outside of aviation seems to really be the key to having a balance.
Yes. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. You've probably flown with pilots before where this job that's all they have, and they fly the maximum amount of hours. They just have no life outside of aviation, and I always thought that was kind of sad. And so I'm real thankful that not only do I have an outside passion, but my wife shares it with me. So for years, she would do the horse thing, and I would ride dirt bikes out in Arizona. And then once we got into the sport, we kind of merged, and now we're traveling all over the country, and in a lot of cases, international competitions. So it's allowed us to kind of tap into another part of our relationship that we didn't know existed. So, and it's totally separate from aviation. Even though I go to competitions and everybody calls me captain and all that stuff, and it's all funny and everything. But when I'm out there with the horses, I don't think about airplanes, one bit. It's just all about competition and just having fun and, meeting new people. And so I'm thankful, for that you gotta balance this job, with something else, or, as I always like to say, I work to live. I don't live to work. So hopefully everybody shares that same sentiment.
Something that I think Europeans get. They work only enough so that they can live and have that siesta in the afternoon, that glass of wine in the evening with their, fresh meats and cheeses, and just enjoy life. And it's kind of nonchalant. And here in America, as an immigrant myself and my family coming from Europe, we grew up with that European mentality. Yeah, you work hard, but it's just so that you can afford to do the things to have a nice home, enjoyment with the family, go on these vacations, to have these bonding moments. You don't work so much that, everybody's working because you got to pay for the big house and the big, RV and all this stuff. Granted, if you can afford those things and use those in a productive way, sure. But I think in America, we have storage units upon storage units per family because we buy all this stuff
Mm-hmm.
and we use it one or two times and then it gets put into a storage unit and these things start to weigh us down. There's a lot of truth to the theory that, you find a passion. For most of us, it's aviation, but then you find something to balance that out, another passion, another connection, something else. And it seems to me that those aviators are usually the ones that don't get their panties in a bunch, pardon the expression. But,
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, when I come to work, I'm focused and I'm excited to be to work and motivated. I don't feel as if I'm working. I'm just worn out because of working. And especially if I'm had a good weekend of competition, it's kind of nice to come to work and shift gears, shift your mindset, and focus on flying. So flying is a form of therapy for myself. Always thought that. So it's just something that we all share when we get up into the flight deck. That it's just a blessing to be able to do this job. So
yeah. And we've talked about this, quite a bit. Actually, the first time we flew together all those years ago, when I was still relatively new here at the Legacy Carrier, and you told me all about your journey, and we're going to get more into that here in a little bit. But before we do, I kind of wanted to talk about this week's flight sequence together. We haven't flown together probably in, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, and this trip is a 5-day trip, and for me, I had a 5-day trip, then 1 day off, and then we started this 5-day trip. So, I was rested and prepared and excited that I got to fly with you. And you had just come off the couple weeks of wins, and so you're happy to be there. And we had a really good time. And our first really interaction, once we said hello and caught up and had all the niceties, you looked at me and said, "So you think we're going to Dallas? I don't think we're going to make it." And we hadn't even, people hadn't even boarded the aircraft yet. It was an hour prior to departure. We had just got onto the flight deck. That aircraft had been parked there for a while, so we were powering systems up and kind of just going through the minutia of our pre-flight flow. And I turned to look at you and I knew there was some weather pulling through, but really? What? And you're like, yeah, did you look at it? Look at the TAF? I mean, and before we even left, how many times was our dispatch release revised?
Well, yeah, our edict time was revised probably about 6 or 7 times before we left. So, yeah, I knew it was going to be an interesting flight, to say the least. But the rate the weather was moving, the direction it was moving, they gave us plenty of fuel for the flight. So, it's just one of those things where, yeah, I think we're probably eventually going to get in there, but yeah, we're not going to be on time for sure.
Yeah. So there we were, we had pulled up all our documents on our electronic flight bags. You had mentioned an edict. For those listening to the show often know what an edict is, but if you're a first-time listener or not really into aviation, what is an edict? That's an expected departure clearance time. If the system, the ATC system, gets overwhelmed, then what air traffic control will do is any aircraft that is on the ground scheduled for departure may get a delay. And an estimated departure clearance time is then given so that the flight crew and the airline could, together decide on, are we going to load up on time and push off the gate on time? Are they going to go sit somewhere on the airport? And that, of course, you've got the engines running, that's burning fuel, that costs money. Sometimes aircraft will do that because they need the gate, and then they run the aircraft on the auxiliary power unit and shut down both engines, which then gives the passengers the comfort of having air-conditioned air and power and whatnot. So there's also the opportunity that maybe the edict is 2 or 3 hours away. So we're either going to deplane the aircraft and have everybody sit in the terminal where it's comfortable and they can use the restroom and get food and whatnot, or we may not board at all. So the fact that we had an hour edict time before even really completing our pre-flight flows, and then we talked about the weather, and then originally we had one alternate, and then we got a revision on our flight release, and then we were given 2 alternates because the weather at our to get to our alternate, or the weather at our alternate, was now looking not so good. So, it was a very busy first hour of the sequence. Eventually, which was very nice because, you looked at me and said, I think that edict's not going to hold up, so I'm going to go ahead and have them board the aircraft. I think we'll probably maybe even push on time, and we can go sit out there if we have to sit for 10, 15 minutes. Are you okay with that? I felt very honored to be included in that decision, and as I remember from flying with you in the past, is your standard operating procedure. So it's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And sure enough, by the time we pushed off the gate, the ground controller said, well, your edict time changed to 12 minutes from now. Will you be ready to be in the air? So basically on time. And sure enough, we flew to Dallas, and we got rerouted, as we mentioned in the last show, and rerouted again. And then we were given holding, and then we were given a vector and heading, and they asked us to look at the weather and see if we can get rerouted an even different way, because like you said, the weather was moving through relatively fast. We ended up landing in Dallas overblocked by, I think it was an hour, wasn't it?
Yeah, right around an hour.
Yeah, so by the time we landed, our schedule had us sitting in Dallas for about 3 hours and then flying to Puerto Rico for the layover. Now, 3 hours, we were only an hour late, no problem. However, that's not how it worked out, because from what we were told, is that we went illegal. Too many flight hours. We overblocked, and therefore FAR 117 kicked in. They got a notice, and crew scheduling removed us from that flying and had us flying to Charlotte in like 45 minutes. So we had to get off that plane and go to the new gate and we were rushed, but not to the point where we felt overwhelmed. But so be it. We went to Charlotte, and then that's where our schedule kind of fell apart, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because you went one direction to one layover hotel, and I went to another. And that they usually don't split us up like that. So you said, well, you know what? During that kind of quick progression from one gate to the other while we were in Dallas, the 45 minutes that we had between turns, because of this reassignment and trying to get all the flights out on time, or at least close, you said, well, I'm going to grab some food. So why don't you see if they can change our layover hotel to the long one, because why stay at the airport hotel if we're going to be there a long time? And there was some confusion there, but the crew scheduler told me, well, you got a long layover, so you're downtown, and your captain's got a short layover, so he's at the airport. And what ended up happening was you ended up deadheading the next morning for a long layover in Phoenix, and I stayed in Charlotte all day.
Mm-hmm.
Recorded a podcast with Rob from the hotel, went for a run, and then that evening flew to Phoenix, and I stayed at the short layover hotel in Phoenix, and we ended up meeting up again on day 3 at the airport, in front of the gate that was flying us from Phoenix to Maui, and here we are.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a discombobulated sequence. Unfortunately, it's nice when you're together for the whole trip. You're kind of on a routine. You kind of got each other's backs, per se. And then they just split us apart, and I was flying with a different captain for one leg, and you were deadheading. So these things happen. Mm-hmm. But we were very fortunate that we were able to meet back up again and fly to Maui.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then how was that layover for you? Was it an exciting long layover?
Oh, Phoenix? Yeah, typical downtown Phoenix layover. A little bit of workout, a little bit of food. Yeah, it's nothing special, but nothing really stood out.
Yeah, being in your old stomping grounds.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, here we are in Maui, and last night we got to go get a good dinner. Really enjoyed our time, grabbing a bite to eat and taste the adult beverage, and then here we are today, recording. So, thank you. What I wanted to do now was talk a little bit about your journey. It is relatively interesting because you've got a lot of different airlines under your belt, and not because you were interviewing places, but because of the nature of our business.
One interview,
and how many airlines later? But let's start at the beginning. You mentioned that you went to college and did some aviation work, but when did your interest in aviation truly begin?
Yeah, probably at like a lot of us, young kid, 9, 10, 11 years old, got a small airplane ride and just thought that was the coolest thing. And then my older brother and I, we used to travel to go see our grandparents, and so got to fly on an airliner every summer, and just a lot of times American Airlines, because my grandparents lived in Arkansas, Little Rock, so we got to fly on the airliners, and just thought that was the neatest thing. And so that kind of planted the seed. And then I had a high school teacher who he had started an aviation career, but he never finished. And so I mentioned to him that I was interested in being a pilot. And so he kind of, you can go to college for that. And I was like, oh, wasn't aware of that. So he kind of steered me in the right direction, and never having anybody in my family in the industry, so I was kind of on my own to get it figured out. But as it turned out, my father was living in Arizona at the time, and so I got to go to Arizona State. They had a flight program, and so that's the route I took, and did the traditional flight instructor thing, and then I started working on the ramp for a smaller legacy airline, and worked on the ramp. And while I was so I've been in the industry since I was 20 years old, and so after graduation, then I got a job at flying Grand Canyon tours at one of the airlines, flying one of the tour companies. So I did that for a few months, and got some Twin Otter time, some turbine time, and then I got on with a commuter airline back east, based in JFK, and flew for them for about 3.5 years, and then got rehired as a pilot for the same small legacy airline as I started on the ramp with, and then, like you said, 3 uniform changes later, here we are.
So your journey in aviation really started in Pueblo West, Colorado, and your typing teacher was the one that had the kind of paused aviation career that got you started on it?
Right. So he had started his journey as he wanted to be an airline pilot, and I think I never did get the full story, but for one reason or another, he just never finished the program. I think he got his private license and just never finished. But he ended up becoming a teacher, so he was my teacher years later, and so he's the one who started to steer me in that direction. And then once I figured out which college I was going to go to, Arizona State, then it was just full focus at that point. So
yeah, and Arizona State at the time that you went there called it Aero-Tech.
Yes,
that was so was that in conjunction with your general education classes and all that too?
Yeah, it was a similar, if not the same degree as, say, Embry-Riddle, but for, at least at that time, it was what we referred to as the poor man's Embry-Riddle. So it was, my flight training was significantly less cost, I believe. So, so I got aviation degree from Arizona State. And
what airport were you flying out of?
So I started at Falcon Field in Mesa.
Yeah.
And at that time, the flight program had satellite most of the flight schools at all the airports around the Phoenix area had a contract with the Arizona State Flight Program,
Mhm.
so you could fly at any of those schools that you wanted to, and they had a discounted rate for the program, and so they had to go through, the 141
Mhm.
program to qualify for credits at school, but all the classes were on the main campus. So in addition to your aviation classes, you had all the university classes, psychology and philosophy and all that other stuff that
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what that has to do with aviation, but maybe it does. I just don't know it.
Oh, sure. I mean, you definitely use that and understanding of the way people think and perceive things as a captain in PAC. You definitely are looking at your crew, your not just your first officer, but your flight attendants, and it was maybe a little bit of that education that you received at Arizona State kind of lends its way to making your decisions even today, I think.
Yeah, and I would also say just experience. After sitting as a first officer for 18 years, you tend to pick up on things from captains, both good and bad. And so, as you you fly with people, and you think, oh, yeah, I'd like to be a captain like that, or conversely, you fly with somebody and, yeah, I don't want to be like that when I'm a captain.
Exactly.
So, the first officer is probably one of the hardest jobs in the industry, because you have to, even though there's standardization, you still have to deal with so many different personalities per se. And so,
Yeah.
at least as a captain, you get to fly with your favorite captain every time. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, and
that's
that's
kind of
like
nice.
that chameleon. We've heard this before. We probably talked about this before on the show as well. Is first officer they adopt a label as being a chameleon
Mm-hmm.
because, like you said, we've said this many times in the past few years of the podcast. Is that you learn from everyone. At least that's the goal. You should learn from the good, the bad, uh, and learn from yourself too. Learn, the mistakes that you've made in the past. Learn from them, and learn what the best way to handle them, and what maybe the way that you shouldn't handle them from the people that you're flying with, and maybe even from the cabin crew, because maybe there's a situation that wasn't handled quite right, or maybe you were going down a direction that was going to bite you, and so you have to react to that. You have to learn from it. And it's funny that you say that 18 years as an FO you learn. I think 18 years as an FO, most people first reaction is oh my god, like after a year or two you're like, I'm ready for my fourth stripe. I'm ready. But this cyclical nature of this industry, that happens in the end. If I were to have some kind of positive outlook on that experience, is that I think a long time as an FO at a mainline carrier really does shape your personality as a captain.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So your journey in aviation brought you to doing Grand Canyon tours. We've heard about some operators doing these Grand Canyon tours. As when I was a flight instructor, that was something that was really looked at, because I too did all my flight training in Phoenix, or most of it at least,
Mm-hmm.
from instrument forward. And I ended up flight instructing out of Chandler, hop, skip, and a jump from Mesa and Falcon and Williams Gateway and all that. And that was definitely an option. Um, would you say that experience was a positive experience flying Grand Canyon tours?
Yeah, it would, just because it was probably some of the most challenging and rewarding flying that I've ever done. I mean, we're landing on these dirt strips in the middle of the canyon. Grand Canyon flying, just in general, turbulence, the landing at the Canyon Airport, the winds, and you're flying a Twin Otter, which is basically just a little kite, hovering over the runway. You learn some pretty good crosswind techniques.
Mm.
You learn how to fly an airplane, in my opinion, That's translated, throughout my career. I think I've always had after that experience, a decent ability to, to fly in, strong winds, and that's never really bothered me.
Yeah, 25 years later, you can score 27 on the Aviator Tony scale of landings.
There you go.
So that's great to hear, because I really don't know if I've ever asked anyone about the Grand Canyon Tour flying before. I have known quite a few people that have done it. And usually small operators, you either love it or you hate it kind of thing. It just depends on who the boss is at any particular time, I think.
Well, yeah. Well, back then, at the time, I don't think you really stopped to smell the roses and realize how lucky and you are to be doing it, because all everybody's focus was, I got to get this flight time and move on to something else. So it's just all about updating the resume and trying to move on. But looking back on it, I mean, that was some of the funnest flying I've ever done, and probably will do in a commercial capacity. So unfortunately, when you're that young in your early 20s, you're just so focused on trying to get out of there. Sometimes you don't really stop and enjoy the moment as much as you should. But yeah, we didn't get paid a lot, but that wasn't the point. It was get the experience and get out of there.
And how did that job transition to the regional job?
Well, good, I think. Well, I should say my first winter on the East Coast was the winter of 95. And at that time, my first base was Washington, D.C., and they got hit with the major blizzard of 1995. And at that time, I think I had maybe 12 hours of actual flying in an airplane, because all my instrument time has just been either simulated or very little, actual. So
12 hours of instrument time.
12 hours of actual instrument time.
Yeah.
So here I am flying on the East Coast in the nasty weather, and so your learning curve goes up pretty quickly. So yeah, it was a good experience. So I think it translated pretty well. I think it just goes back to the basic training. I was trained very well, good instructors, good program. So it wasn't that big a deal, but it went pretty well, in my opinion. So
yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely an eye opener getting into all that weather. But after a while, it just no big deal.
Another day at the office.
That's right.
Yeah. How many years were you there?
So I was there for about 3.5 years, and then in 1998 got rehired as a pilot with the airline that I started working on the ramp with years ago.
Yeah, we like to call that airline Cactus Air.
Yeah,
an alias to one of the originals there.
Right.
And so that must have been pretty cool. As a matter of fact, on our leg yesterday, leaving Phoenix, you and the ramper were having a conversation. It was a little bit of a blast from the past, talking about how you used to work on the ramp, and you guys were talking to each other. And I was pleasantly surprised to hear this reminiscence going on. I thought that is so cool to work in one department and do that for years, and then do all the below wing stuff. And then now you get to be at command of an airplane at the same place. And a lot of those people are the same people.
Yeah, I still see some of my old ramp buddies out there. And I remember my interview when I was 20 years old. Well, at that time, Cactus Airline had an age limit to work on the ramp. You had to be 21. And so 20. You had to be 20. Mm-hmm. So my 20th birthday, I walked in my resume, and so by the time it got through the channels, so that was June. So by the time I got my interview and got hired, it was January. of the following year of 1990. And so I was 20 years old, and I remember the lady asking me, why do you want to work here? And I just looked her in the eye and says, I'm going to be a pilot here someday. And she's like, oh, okay, I like your attitude. And that was my focus. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I used that time over the years as I was getting my ratings and everything. I got to know some of the pilots. They'd be some of the first officers be walking around with the captains, on pre-flight. I'd started talking to him, whatever, and I got to know the chief pilot. I'd go up into his office and just kind of, shoot the breeze. And so by the time I left to go to the Grand Canyon, I had established, some good connections there. And just so happens when I got interviewed years later, I pretty much knew everybody in the interview. The sim evaluator actually wrote me a recommendation to the Air Guard in Phoenix years prior that he was part of. So I knew him. And then the interview board, I knew 3 out of the 5 people there. So I felt really comfortable with the interview, and I prepped for it because I wanted it. And but still, it was really more of a tell us what you've been doing since you've been gone. It felt like they were just welcoming me back into the fold, and so it was a pretty special moment to get hired as pilot. And then over the years, to see some of my old ramp buddies down there still, and and in the early days, before all the the union stuff got in there, sometimes I'd go, help them load bags, or I'd be doing the walk around. I'd grab a few bags, and toss them on there, and just kind of shoot the breeze with them. And but over the years, that all that kind of stuff. And then after the mergers, you get some faces down there that you don't recognize. So yeah, it was before we pushed back. I got to talk to that guy yesterday, and so he knew some of the mutual people, and so it's always kind of nice to catch up with those Phoenix guys.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's nice to hear, and it's a little intimidating too, to sit there in the right seat and go, wow, this guy knows everybody. I better watch my P's and Q's flying with Greg over here. But you've had some time there at Cactus Air, and actually I was either in training or a new flight instructor when it happened, when the merger with what we call All American Air and Cactus Air happened, and it was an ugly time. I was privy to some of what was happening, and with the unions and mergers and pilot contracts and all the things and the fights that were happening between one pilot group and the other, and it was ugly. And so you spent some time there. Was that the 737 to start and the Airbus after? Or?
Yeah, so the first 10 years was on the 737, and then right during the merger, I was one of the last ones to upgrade on the 737, so I was like about the third most junior captain at the time on the 737. And then that was 2008, so early in the year, like April, checked out. So I had my crispy hat, I didn't even have it broke in yet, didn't even have an ego yet. And then the summer of 2008 hits, and so we get the economy just starting to tank, fuel prices going up, and I'm thinking, this doesn't look good. And so then by the end of the summer, we started really getting heavy into the feud, if you will, with the other pilot group, and so we ended up furloughing on our side, and not system-wide, but just on the west side. So consequently, I got downgraded later at the end of the summer, in the fall. So I could have gone back to the 737, but after 10 years in that fleet, we were starting to retire the 737. So I was done with it. I was ready to move on to the bus, and so that's when I went to the right seat on the Airbus in 2008, and For me, it was kind of a blessing because now I was a senior FO. So for that 10 years, it was a perfect storm. We had not only the situation with the other pilot group going on, then we got hit with age 65.
Mm,
So then the pilots that were at age 60 got another 5 years added on
right.
of mandatory retirement. So that equated to people like myself of 10 years of stagnation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just us, you guys felt it at the regional, and
Yep.
so it was just system wide. It was the 10 years of the lost decade. That's what
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah, at Sandpiper, we felt that too. And we all
Yeah.
looked at each other like, oh, now we're going to be FOs forever.
Right. Yeah. And so for me, it was kind of a blessing because I had friends who didn't lose their seat, but now they're junior captains on reserve, just miserable schedule, no control over their schedules, super junior, and they couldn't bid off. There were no bids, so they were stuck. So for me, I was senior FO, weekends off, bid what I want. I was, in retrospect, I was pretty lucky.
Yeah. And you were there about 10 years, and then was it 2014, somewhere around there, where the other merger happened with the Legacy Airlines?
Yeah, so 13 is when the other merger happened,
Mhm.
and so by the time we got all that worked out seniority-wise, then the first bid I was able to upgrade again was 2017, I believe. Yeah, 2017. So spring of 2017 is when I got my seat back in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I think that's where I flew with you the first time.
Yeah, and I was relatively new. I came over through that flow-through agreement in 2018, the early 2018. So, yeah, we were both kind of, newer at the base, and both just happy to be there. And yeah, it was a very positive experience. And here we are. Now, I want to ask you a question about, since you've flown both and you've got extensive time on both the Boeing, and I'm not here to try to start a feud between Boeing pilots and Airbus pilots, but we hear this all the time. And then COVID hit, and nobody, even uttered a word of if it ain't Boeing, it ain't going, or you Airbus guys, and all the jokes and the memes and the Larson cartoons about the difference between Boeing with the million gauges, steam gauges, and then the Airbus up, down, left, right. But since you have extensive experience on both, what would be the pros and cons of each, from a pilot's perspective?
Well, I don't know. I can just tell you that especially the older I get, from a comfort level, the Airbus is hands down the more comfortable airplane to fly in, and over a course of a trip, I just feel like not as fatigued as I did on the 7.3s. But you got to remember the 7.3s that we were flying at Cactus Air, they were some of the most basic. I mean, there's 737-200s. We had 737 300 hardball steam gauges. Like I said, those 200 airplanes. I mean, it was tune the radial, twist the knob. I mean, just basic old school navigation. So, so to go to an Airbus airplane where everything's managed and integrated, it's just it's no comparison. So, and I've been on the Airbus so long now that I couldn't imagine going back to the 7.3. But it was a fun airplane to fly, the 7.3. But I do enjoy flying the Airbus for sure.
Do you ever miss the yoke?
No, that's one thing I don't miss. Yeah. So in fact, that's the one thing. At some point I do want to try flying wide body. But yeah, just the thought of flying international for hours on end with the with the yoke and not being able to cross your legs, like we can in the Airbus. It just seems odd to me.
Yeah, it's quite comfortable, isn't it? We got the tray table. I always hear people, joke or make fun of me going, "Oh, the tray table." It's like, hey, I use it as a desk. I write stuff all the time. Taxi instructions. It's really easy. I don't have to like twist my wrist to kind of write on a notepad that's on the side window there on one of those chart holders, and it's all right there. Meals are a lot of fun. I don't have to prop stuff up on my lap with a napkin and try not to spill on myself. I've got a tray table right there. It's absolutely a comfortable airplane. As a matter of fact, when I came over after years, off and on, 13 years of commuting from either LA or Seattle to Chicago or New York, and I sat on many jump seats, from MD-80s to 75s, 76s to Airbuses to Boeings and 73s, and man, Alaska, that second jump seat on the 73, oh my God, that was that's not a jump seat. It's yeah. So my chiropractor loved me whenever I ride on, try to commute on one of those. But I knew I had a choice. I could do 73 LA, which meant flying out of Ontario, Santa Ana, and Los Angeles as a combined base, which our listeners know Ontario's 5 minutes from my house. I'm basically under the base leg, and for those that are coming straight in, I see Amazon Prime and FedEx and UPS all day, all night. And so I had a decision to make whether to pick the possibility at least for a shorter commute driving, or stick to the Airbus, which at that time was only out of Los Angeles. However, it had international flying. It was an international division. It had the Hawaii flying, which was something I was really looking forward to as we're sitting here on a somewhat cloudy but cool Maui afternoon. And it was that comfort level, the fact that you can cross your legs, and if you're doing like, what's it, 6 hours and 35 minutes or something like that yesterday, that's a long time. The ability to stand up in the cockpit and stretch your legs occasionally, that's everything. And if that's going to be your office for a decade or two, why not be comfortable?
Yeah, and then the NX airplanes are just so nice to fly.
Yeah, the Neo, the new engine design, or the 321 NX, quieter, a little smoother, I think. The logic with the auto flare at 100 rather than 50, I really like that. I can tell that a lot of people go, can't really tell. But I really like it because it kind of gives you a little bit more time to really get a feel for it, which, I know that wasn't a factor yesterday at all, and that landing. And we got to talk about that landing. So let's set the conditions. The winds were right crosswind in Maui, which Maui's windy quite often. Weather conditions change, especially in the afternoon as we were approaching. But it was gusting. At one point, I believe the ATIS was saying it was 22, gusting at 34, and a little bit of a right crosswind and short runway. So, auto brakes medium. Ran through the landing assessment, made sure that we had enough runway available considering the conditions, the temperature, and whatnot. And I thought, okay, well, most pilots, I noticed I would use the words pilots, not captain or first officers, but most pilots, when they come into a place like Maui or anywhere with a short runway with windy conditions, and even in the briefing, a lot of captains will say, don't worry about greasing it on, just plant it. We don't have runway to spare on this. And so most people just plant it. And it's a beautiful flight, not a bump in the sky. The passengers slept the whole way. And then the last 5 seconds of the flight, it's planting the airplane. And everybody's like, the flight was awful. I'm like, well, 99% of it was smooth. Just the landing was a little aircraft carrier-ish, They
don't remember that.
They don't remember any of that. They can't see past 5 seconds. And yesterday, with the windy conditions, I actually was anticipating a firm landing because, like I said, short runway, the options to turn off the runway are very few, and it was very windy. And it was gusty. You were working. You were working hard the last 500 feet. And that airplane, and we had a wing drop at one point, and I'm sitting there. I'm relatively calm because I've flown with you many times, and I know I've seen your ability. And as a captain with this many hours on the Airbus, I mean, who am I to judge? But when that last 50 feet came and we got that little bit of gust and the nose started to weather vane and you just planted it on to the point where I thought we were going to have one of those landings where it was going to be and a nice. Instead, right at the last second in the flare, it was like landing on a pillow. And I was like, I said to myself, stay down. And right away, I don't even think the nose gear was down. You said, and that's how it's done.
Well, yeah, I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, very, very good. And to have our senior flight attendant, our number one, as soon as the door opened, she was like, that landing was shit hot. I was very impressed. So,
yeah.
Good job.
Thanks.
So, you've got a history. You've had one interview with this company, and you've flown under 3 different names.
Mm-hmm.
Someone that's getting into this industry, that's working on their ratings right now, knowing what we're dealing with, the COVID thing is really, I think, a blink in the eye. Because when we look at the numbers, we're starting to see the traveling public is coming up there. I just saw one of our company episodes of their little podcast that they do for employees on the EFB that said that we had the highest numbers since 2019 last week, which is wonderful to hear. And I think that in the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to see pretty close to normal numbers with an increase in revenue to the point where we've already talked about they're going to start hiring off the street. We've already talked about bringing all the airplanes that are parked back. So for someone who's starting out and working on their ratings, what advice can you give someone that looks at this and goes, I don't know if I want to go airline route?
Well, I never really looked at, the trends, because if I would have, I just followed my heart and I knew that's what I wanted to do and I just did it. Because if I would have looked, because back in the early 90s, same scenario, same cycle, economic downturn, nobody's hiring. So if you look at that trend, or had I looked at that trend at that time, then, it's easy to get discouraged and just say, you know what, this isn't going to work out. But unbeknownst to everybody else, cycle changes, floodgates open, everybody's hiring. It's just, and so everything goes in waves. And so you kind of get in on that wave and just ride it. But I think, I don't think any of us really got into this for the, making a lot of money or whatever the external reasons that people outside the industry think it's all about. We got into it because we love flying and the thought of doing this as a career. So I think just stay with that. Go just keep moving on, because these things are going to change and they always do. So unless they replace us all with autonomous airplanes, then we're gonna need pilots down the road. So just follow your dream.
Yeah. Now, you said earlier that some of the best flying you ever did was when you're doing the canyon tours.
Right.
Do you still feel that flying for Legacy?
Well, yeah. So during the Cactus years, we kind of did the same destinations, same things. Then after the first merger, it opened up a few more cities. When I went to the Airbus that I hadn't gone before, that was kind of exciting to go to some places. But now we're flying to Hawaii. We're going to, the Bahamas. We're going to South America. We're going to Mexico. I mean, we're going all these different places. So it's exciting again. So it's never, really the same destinations. We're not flying to, Omaha and Des Moines all the time. It's always something different, it seems like.
Yeah. And you were very fortunate, as you mentioned earlier, that you didn't have to commute very much in your career.
Mm-hmm.
You did some at the beginning of the career, and now here you are all these years later finding yourself commuting again.
Right.
At a time when there's not that many flights connecting destinations from Northern California to Southern California.
Right.
What has been some of the biggest challenge in commuting for you in the past, say, year?
Well, the past year was, with COVID. So right now I commute out of Santa Rosa Airport down to Los Angeles. So unlike the Phoenix, LA route that I was commuting, which is very busy, a lot of flight attendants, a lot of pilots, it's a busy commute. So this commute, I very rarely see another crew member trying to go down. That being said, I have to commute offline because we don't have any flights that go in there to LA. So typically I have to fly on another airline, their commuter, out of there. And so when I first started the commute, it was 4 flights a day down to Los Angeles. So it was a lot of options, and it's just so convenient because where I live now is 15 minutes from the airport there in Santa Rosa. So you just cute little airport, walk out on the tarmac, get on the airplane, and there's typically seats available and not a problem. Well, COVID hits and it drops down to 1 flight a day.
Ugh.
So then I found myself having to drive quite a bit to San Francisco, which is an hour and a half away, and try to get a flight out of there. So that part's been, a little challenging, but still very, very doable.
And you're flying? Are you driving over the Golden Gate?
Typically not, because to get to the airport, if you go over the Golden Gate, you gotta go through the city, gotta go through the park, and hit all those traffic lights. So I typically go around across the Richmond Bridge, over by Oakland, then cross the Bay Bridge, and go that way through the city. That's typically how I go.
Yeah, those bridge tolls, man, it's crazy. When I lived there, was it $1 to cross the Bay Bridge and $5 for the Golden Gate?
Yeah, it's like $6.
$6 now for the Bay, and what is it in the Golden Gate, like 15 or something?
No, it's not quite that much. I don't know. I've got one of those little
you got the I got the
easy
cow.
pass or whatever.
Yeah, stuff. So commuting can be a challenge, and someone who's starting out going, well, commuting, you get to fly in and then just walk over to your gate and go, but that's not really the case, is it? I mean, a lot of times you have to pick up a hotel, and that can get relatively expensive, like you did on this trip, right?
Right. So yeah, this last year, because a lot of my trips, I wasn't able to commute in either one end or the other. So a lot of times I have to come in the night before, which would require, getting a hotel and so you got enough rest for the trip the next day. So yeah, I found my hotel expenses have gone. Granted, I could get a crash pad like I did when I was much younger, when I was commuting to New York, but now that I'm in my 50s, I just can't. I can't do the crash pad.
Oh, you don't want to be on the top bunk with someone underneath you?
Nah, I just can't do that anymore. So
yeah, when you're young, it's like those kind of things, or you put up with it because it's new, it's exciting. But then as your time goes on, you'd rather even get a little apartment or something, So your journey has been kind of a pleasant transition. Now, you've had your ups and your downs. Have you had any moments in your career where maybe at the conclusion of a flight or a sequence you said, oh man, I don't know if I want to do this anymore?
No, never had that.
Not even during
I've had
on your worst day.
Yeah, I've had trips where you fly with a captain, and it's like you look back on it and thinking, yeah, I'm not flying with that guy anymore.
Do not pair.
Yeah, do not pair with that guy. And in my, well, before I became a captain as a FO at the Cactus Airline, it was the FO who could. Well, I take that back. Both pilots could do a no-fly list, but I kind of prided myself in. I went 13 years without having anybody on my no-fly list, and I'd flown with all the notorious type captains. And for the most part, I'd always give everybody a chance. And for the most part, I got along with most of them. There were a few that were just like, yeah, I'd rather not fly with them, but I wouldn't no-fly them or call in sick for a trip. I wouldn't do any of that. I just knew that, okay, these 4 days are going to be not maybe as enjoyable as others, but never really had a safety issue until the year 13 when I flew with somebody, and this particular captain just for 4 days was just relentless. And at the end of the trip, I just made the decision. And he, as he's leaving, as pilots, we typically, okay, we'll see you next time. Good flying with you, all that stuff. And I just turned and looked at him. And I said, you know what? No, I'm not going to fly with you anymore. And matter of fact, I need to congratulate you because up to this point, I've had nobody on my no-fly list. You're the first. Congratulations. He's like, oh, you don't have to be like that. I'm like, yeah, just go. I've had enough.
Yeah, and yeah, it's actually commendable that you had the patience. I know I've told a few stories in the past about captains, and you reach your wits' end because it's so frustrating, and it's not necessarily because they're bad pilots. It's just that their personalities are so rough sometimes, or they're critical, or no matter whose leg it is to fly, they're really flying.
Well, yeah, that's exactly, in my opinion, the most dangerous personality is that type of personality, the micromanagement,
Mm-hmm.
micromanagement style of leadership. In my opinion, has no business being in the flight deck because, like you said, you don't know who's flying because when it's your leg, it's really his leg. And so you have kind of no idea, oh, all right, am I flying this or are you flying this? Because I can't tell right now. And so in my opinion, that's probably one of the most dangerous types of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's a type of leadership that I do not want to be like. And so it was for that reason that I had
The one.
He was the
one. The only one.
So yeah, after 23 years at this airline now, he's the only one.
And speaking of, you sometimes you get into the flight deck and you're flying with someone, and I think when you make it to this stage in the game at a legacy carrier, whether it's a U.S. legacy carrier or a legacy carrier or a national carrier or overseas international, and you're flying narrow body, heavy equipment, whatever it is, cargo equipment, and you've been around. You've got the experience, you've been around, and so to get here, I think all those other personalities are usually weeded out. But sometimes things happen in people's lives. You really never know who you're flying with to a certain degree. And you come across a pilot, and in your case, you'd come across an FO that maybe it's just not all there. They're having a bad time. How do you handle that?
Well, fortunately, I haven't had anything too drastic. But yeah, I would agree with you. There's been people I've flown with over the years, both as an FO and as a captain, that you notice changes amongst them. If there's something going on with them at home or whatever, and you just notice that, okay, something's off. There's a difference here because this guy or girl is normally a certain way, and now they're not. So, and again, part of being I guess that education comes into play. It's part of being a good FO is being a good psychologist sometimes, or being a good listener.
Yeah.
Because you fly with a pilot, he's going through a divorce. Well, yeah, I've sat there and listened to many of divorce stories over the years. Just so I think as an FO, you tend to learn to be a good listener sometimes, and
Yeah.
I mean that's all it takes is just they need somebody to talk to, and
I've actually joked about that at home with the family. I'm like, I'm in therapy every single day that I'm flying on the flight line. I get to 37,000 feet, the seatbelt sign goes off, and we take the headsets off, and we just sit there, and I get to have an adult conversation about whatever, or the other pilot next to me gets to have their conversation about what's going on in their lives, their perception of the drama that they have, and the other person is usually pretty good to listen and to go, oh really, and tell that's cool, unless they're just way out there on a left field. But so I have my therapy sessions. I get to talk with my peers that are like-minded. I mean, it's
Right.
really pretty cathartic. Sit there and come home from work, and I got to talk about my stuff, my problems, and then I come home and I get the look like, you need to give me time because I need to now, talk to you about everything that's happened, and let me tell you about what your kids did while you were gone. So you're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, I just
that's a whole new set of problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So far you've flown a good handful of airplanes. Have you had a favorite?
It's got to be the Airbus, just because I got the most time in it. Well, I would have to say that Twin Otter was pretty fun to fly, and like I said, the type of flying that we did, that was pretty exciting looking back on it.
Yeah. And in all your years of flying and having non-normal or emergencies happen, does one stick out in your mind as pretty major?
I never really had, say, any type of major issue. Some flap problems, had some gear indication problems over the years. But yeah, one Airbus flight, we ended up making the nightly news. One night we had a flap problem, and we had this was back before we had our landing app, so we had to run all the numbers for zero flap landing and all that stuff.
Yeah, malfunction increments and
yeah,
landing distance computations
exactly.
and all the charts and yeah.
Yeah, so we're sifting through all the charts while we're flying all over Southern California. Well, unbeknownst to us, that gave the news crews enough time to get down to the airport and film this emergency aircraft coming into Los Angeles. And so, yeah, we made the news that night, but it was pretty uneventful, just a little bit faster than normal landing. But, and of course, they interview passengers in the baggage area. Well, how did you feel? Were you scared and all this? No, pilots, they made us feel real comfortable. And the captain I was with at that time, he was real good, and so he was, made him feel very safe, and everything was under control. So again, that was a good example of learning from that situation of how, okay, if something like this happens, that's how I would want to handle that situation, is how he did. So again, as a 18-year FO, that was, it's just an education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what has been your favorite layover destination to date?
To date, hard to say, really. Enjoy these Hawaii ones. But I would say probably the ones I enjoy the most is when, say, I get to see family or friends. So being from Colorado, having a long Denver layover. Sometimes I can rent a car, go down and see my family, that kind of thing. So I enjoy that. But yeah, these Hawaii ones aren't too shabby.
Not too shabby, huh? Yeah. So I got a phone call earlier when we were heading out to one of my favorite destinations on Maui, which is I call them roach coaches, but they're the mobile food trucks. This is actually a mobile food trailer. And last night we were talking about it, and I had suggested that we go check out um, this South Maui fish company. It's wonderful fresh fish, fresh poke, and you're like, yeah, I'm down for that. So we found where they had moved their location from last year, and we went down there. While we were walking down there, I got a text message from a friend of mine, a colleague that's here that is now back from leave for the company. So he's back in training on getting recalled on the aircraft, and now he's going to be on the Airbus here in Los Angeles. And part of his OE experience, his operating experience that you have to go through, or IOE at some companies, initial operating experience, he has to get internationally qualled. And that international qual is going to be to here in Maui. And so he saw I had a social media post that, hanging out in Maui, and went for a run this morning. I think I posted that, and he's like, "Hey, you're always in Maui. I got to come down, and I'm really not sure on, do I have to get tested? There's not really much company guidance, or I don't know where to look for it." And so I sent him a list of the requirements that he's going to have to do. It's not a big deal. It's just a QR code that you're supposed to get from the state of Hawaii, which is basically, as a crew member, stating that you're not ill in any way, shape, or form, and you understand the limited quarantine that we are supposed to be under. And it reminded me of when you're doing IOE or OE, everything's new, you really don't know, and sometimes you don't know where to find stuff. Do you have any stories about one of your firsts, maybe a story about the first time you were on IOE?
Well, I remember, once after IOE, particularly after I upgraded on the 737. So again, I had upgraded spending 10 years on the airplane. So, I felt pretty confident about myself, particularly that first flight. So I'm sitting at home on reserve, and I get a call. Hey, we just had a late sick call. How soon can you get here? Plane's ready to go. Just call us when you get there. We need you here. So here I am, Mr. Motivated. I grab my hat. It's brand new. Put that thing on. Shirt's pressed to get to the airport. And so got to stop swinging through Starbucks, grab my venti size coffee, head down to the gate, strut down there, get to the airplane. Of course, when they're waiting on you, as you've probably seen, sometimes when you come on board, everybody starts clapping. All right, pilot's here, and I'm just soaking it up, just say, "Hey, you doing? Good to see you. Right on. Okay." And then you make a left turn there, and first officer's sitting there. He goes, "Hey, man, how you doing? I got everything ready. Just let me know when you're ready. Just make your nest and all this stuff. Got the clearance and everything." And so this was in a 737 hardball airplane. And so for all those years, the cup holder, the cup holders on those airplanes were along the side of the center console.
Right.
So kind of that little corner where the panel comes together. Well, never had any issues on the FO side about putting my venti coffee right in that little cup holder. Well, for whatever reason, I'm trying to get this coffee cup into this cup holder, and as one of those situations, we talk about it a lot now in our threat and air management, about threats, and we discuss these distractions for the flight, both pre-flight and also before landing. Well, this flight was just flushed with threats. As soon as I sit down, you get the gate agent. "Oh, you ready to go, Cap?" The flight attendants, they're wanting information. The FO's talking to me. The ground crew's talking to me. I got all these things going on all at once. So all these threats are coming at me, So I'm trying to, knock them down as, one by one. And meantime, I'm trying to get my coffee cup in this thing. It's just not staying in there. And I'm like, yeah, I'll get to that later. So I'm getting my charts out and my headset and, get all squared away, and finally get through all these threats and go through the flows and checklists, and All right, take a deep breath, and all right, okay, I think we're ready. Let's push back. Let's get out of here. So we start the engines up. We start taxiing, and all of a sudden it hits me. It's like, yeah, this is really cool. So now my macho level goes way up. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in charge of this baby now. So we're taxiing out there, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself, and so they clear us for takeoff, and I hit those buttons. The thrust levers go forward, and we're trucking down the runway. I'm just feeling really good about myself. And, V1, rotate, and I pull that yoke back, and all of a sudden I just see this white thing go flying right by my head. And as I look back, I just see this coffee cup go flying through the air, and it lands back by the door.
Oh,
And is like one of those TikTok videos, where they flip the bottle.
yeah.
And it landed perfectly right on its lid, upside down. And it's just going bloop, bloop, back there by the door. And I didn't know what to do, because they didn't train me on this for IOE. And I'm looking back there, and I'm like, yeah, gear up. So we get going, and all right, autopilot on. And I'm looking back there, and it's just going bloop, bloop.
Oh, man.
So we finally get to a safe altitude, and I was able to reach back there and pick it up. And there's a pool of coffee back there, and so I got some. Luckily, I had some towels up there, and I threw them back there to soak it up. And so I went from just being on a macho high, this is the coolest thing, to just right back down to earth, going, okay.
That's the universe putting you in check, buddy.
You got a little cocky there, so it knocked me down a few notches right there. So just sometimes the universe speaks to you at some point. But that was my first trip. Something always happens. The first trip off of IOE.
Yeah, and actually, you're telling me this story, and I've flown with many captains over the years. I've spent my time as a first officer, and one of my favorite stories. I was a very senior FO over at Sandpiper out of Chicago. I had been based there off and on for, at that point, I think around 7 years. And I'm flying with a new captain, first trip off IOE, and he's about my age, sits down. He goes, hey, man, just to let you know, this is my first trip off IOE. Everything went fine, but, if you see me doing anything stupid or bonehead, just, hey, by all means, I see you're a senior FO, just kind of keep me in check, because I was in that seat for many years, but I'm just excited, and, I want to do well. And I'm like, yeah, no problem, man. And I have that little bit of that Italian arrogance that just always kind of likes to come out. So I'm like, don't worry about it, man. You're flying with the best. Don't worry about it, So he's like, oh, okay. He's like laughing a little bit, and it's like calms down, and we push off the gate, and I'm sitting there, just, okay, we're waiting, and the ground crew says, all right, Captain, set your park brake. And Captain says, all right, park brake release, your steering's disengaged, or whatever he said, your clear disconnect headset. And he's like, okay. And so I'm still sitting there waiting and watching him, and he goes, okay, tell him we're ready to taxi. I'm like, when you're ready, I'll call for taxi. He goes, well, tell him we're ready to taxi. I'm like, when you're ready and the airplane's ready, I'll call him when we're ready for taxi. And he goes, what? I'm like, do you want me to start an engine? He was so nervous, like, because you don't just start an engine; you have to wait for the captain to call. Right. Start one, So he's like, "Oh my God, you're trying to be subtle." And I'm like, "Well, I didn't want to make you feel bad or sound like a smartass, so I'm just, like, hey, when you're ready, we'll get there." And she was like, "Oh, well, thanks for not like shoving that in my face." I'm like, "Yeah, no problem, man. I'll start the engine. We'll go when we're ready, But what I learned from that experience was always be humble.
Yeah.
Because when it was my turn to upgrade, and I was sitting there, and I did a quick upgrade because I had, I don't know how many, like 7,000 hours in the Embraer 145 when I upgraded to captain in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had IOE, and everything went fine. I was nervous, but I got through it. And then my very first leg off IOE, I was a New York at LaGuardia JFK co-domiciled captain now. And I remember that first trip. I was very nervous, but luckily I got through it. And I just remembered to stay humble. And I really leaned on my FO. Said the same thing to him. I said, hey, it's my first leg off IOE. So, let's just both keep our heads on a swivel and stay out of trouble. But yeah, you got to remember those experiences and really
it's part of the journey.
Keep that ego in check.
Right. Yeah.
As we come to a closing here, I want to again say thank you for taking the time off of your personal time here on the layover. I really have enjoyed spending time with you and flying with you. But just the last few questions. If you can go back in time for a moment and give yourself some advice, what would you say to yourself?
Well, I think that little deviation in college where I thought I wanted to be a Air Force fighter pilot and getting out of the program for a couple semesters to go do the ROTC thing. And that didn't quite work out because they cut the pilot slots at the university, and I wasn't the brightest one of the bunch, so I wasn't able to secure a pilot slot. So I went back to the program. So that cost me a good year behind some of my peers, and as that translates to today, those same peers, pilots, are a couple thousand numbers senior to me here. So I think, but trying to tell that to a 19-year-old kid,
Right.
So that would probably be my only, and I have no regrets at all because of the way everything's worked out. I've been super blessed, but I would say if there's anything, I probably would have gone back and said, you know what, nah, just keep doing what you're doing. Stay
focused on track. Yeah, that's great advice. And what advice would you give some young aviator that is bright-eyed and flying a Cessna 172 around the pattern, building time, getting ready to pursue this career?
Yeah, just be patient. So often, particularly in recent years, when there's just been so many opportunities and so much progression and growth, there hasn't been a lot of disappointments for some of these younger kids. And now this past year has been real challenging for everybody because all the jobs, everybody stopped hiring, and so we're kind of coming out of this little downturn. And so some might be discouraged by that, but you just gotta just keep doing what you're doing, stay focused. It's gonna happen if you want it bad enough.
Yeah, for those of us that this is the first downturn that they've experienced, it might seem like the end of the world, but for those of us that have experienced multiple downturns, if not a dozen of them or more, it's just another drop in the bucket, and you'll get through it. Just stay at it, keep focused. It's great advice as well. If you can think back to a person in your life that has made the greatest impact to your success in aviation, who would that person be?
In aviation? There's been so many. Cactus Airlines, we were blessed with a really good group of pilots, and so I learned from a lot of good aviators over the years, both how to be a good leader, good pilot. So I really can't think of one person. There's just been so many that it's been a pleasure to learn from over the years, aviation wise.
Well, Greg, I want to thank you for taking this opportunity to give us a little insight on your journey in aviation and with the horseback archery. Anyone that might have listened to the show and thought, man, that really sounds interesting, I want to look into it. What's the best way for someone to do that?
Well, there's numerous things on YouTube, either under horseback archery or mounted archery. Our organization here in the United States is Mounted Archery Association of Americas. We've got both website and Facebook pages. my particular club in Northern California is called the Dragon Riders. We've got a Facebook page, so if you look under Dragon Riders Mounted Archery, you'll see our club and everything that we're doing at our facility in Northern California.
Yeah, excellent. Well, again, thank you for sharing your journey with us, and I look forward to our next adventure together.
Sounds great. Pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, again, many thanks to Captain Greg Ogburn for sitting down with me on that wonderful layover to talk about his journey in aviation and all of the wonderful information about the mounted archery. I also want to thank the frontline workers out there, the doctors, nurses, pharmacists, EMTs, medical techs, and firefighters, law enforcement, grocery store employees, truck drivers, bus drivers, Amazon workers, Uber, Lyft drivers, and of course, all the airline employees and airport employees that show up every day to work to provide the essential services that we do. Also, a big many thanks to all the flight attendants out there as we're approaching the International Flight Attendant Appreciation Day. We hope you're enjoying Squawk Ident. Please help us out and make sure you subscribe and follow to the Squawk Ident podcast. If you like what you hear, just spend a moment and write us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast. We appreciate your support and especially your feedback. Next week, we look forward to another show. I'm off to recurrent training here in a few days, and we'll report back on how it went. Also, a lot of headlines have been just riddled with flight attendant abuses and passenger misconduct. We'll dive into a little bit of that as well. Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram users can find us under the Squawk Ident podcast. And one final thank you to Captain Greg Ogburn for sharing his journey with us. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this grateful aviator. Keep the dirty side down out there, be safe, and take care of each other.
Minimum 200, 100 above. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Retard.